Hi, I'm State Rep Tim O'Neal. I'm from Washington County, and I am the Republican whip. Joining me here today for this legislative update is Representative Valerie Gaydos. Also joining us is Diane Holder. She is the Vice President from ReliabilityFirst, and Jeff Nobers, who's the Executive Director of Pittsburgh Works. The topic today is all about energy, and let's just dive right in. So Diane and Jeff, if you could, let's try, what are the challenges, the key challenges facing our energy industry today?
Well, I will start by saying, energy represents a very small portion of our total economy, 7%, but I will say it's the foundational 7%. It underpins everything from economic activity to environmental goals to societal well-being overall, really. And without a reliable and stable grid, the foundational role of energy crumbles very quickly. And I will say to ensure a reliable grid, we need to focus on a mix of generators. That mix should have three key factors for reliability and stability, and those are diversity, they are resource adequacy, and essential reliability services. And there are risks emerging around a couple of those factors, particularly resource adequacy and essential reliability services, such that there are projections that we may experience resource shortfalls in the near future, maybe as soon as 5 years from now. And it's really about the transition of our grid to cleaner resources. However, as those cleaner resources are coming online, retirements, fossil fuel retirements are kind of outpacing those new resources coming online. In addition to that, the new resources don't operate in the same way that the retiring baseload generators operate. They don't provide as many hours of electricity that the retiring baseload generators provide, because the baseload generators, they kind of operate around the clock. And so with the new resources, you need more of them. So not only are they not keeping pace in terms of retirements and the new resources coming online, but also you need more of them.
So basically you're saying that we need all inclusive, all of the above in order to really achieve some of the goals we need for having energy in Pennsylvania.
A diverse mix is a reliable mix, and that's because all the resource types have their advantages and shortcomings. And if you would have one type of resource experience a problem, like say cloud cover for solar or a natural gas supply not being there for the natural gas plants, you would want other types of resources in the mix to kind of make up for that.
So why don't we run down what are each of the sources of energy that we have here in Pennsylvania? And I think that we are uniquely equipped with a lot of resources. But why don't you go through and tell us what they are? Which we know one is LNG, liquid natural gas.
Right, coal, nuclear. We do have solar and wind. I don't know that we have much battery. I think we have some hydro here in Pennsylvania as well. I think those are pretty much the primary sources.
Yeah, I would say that about covers it, and close to 90% of it is nuclear and gas. Coal is playing less and less of a role. But to go back to Diane's point about a mix of energy, we agree with that. We don't disagree. We don't think you should ban solar panels or wind farms. But the reality of it right now is solar and wind cannot replace gas and nuclear today, as we sit here with technology. And that's just fact. I mean, because if it could, it would have by now. With the decades and trillions of dollars that have been dumped into wind and solar, and they're still comprising 10% or less of energy. And as Diane alluded to, and I'm not an engineer like she is, so I don't understand all the differences, but electricity you generate with solar and wind is not the same as what you're generating with gas and nuclear, and it has inherent issues with it as well. So the big problem that we're sitting on right now is we have seen multiple coal-fired power plants close in our state, Just yesterday, they imploded Homer City, yet there has been nothing to replace it. And these closings occurred because of RGGI and other policies, predominantly at the state level, that really push solar and wind at the expense of other types of energy generation. And, that's fine. We all want a clean environment, but you also have to have a good economy.
So Jeff, I want to get to the policy things here in just a minute, but before we go on, I do want to highlight and just get some more clarity around a point that you made, Diane, and that is around a lack of energy in the near future. So what is causing this scenario? The assumption is your average citizen, as you flip the light switch, the light comes on, and most of us don't really think about whether or not that's going to be true every time we do it. But can you just talk about the big picture with our electrical grid, and what is the challenge that it's leading us to, or leading you to actually say we're at risk of that light not turning on when you flick that switch?
Right. So ReliabilityFirst is one of the 6 regional entities underneath NERC. NERC is the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, and we are tasked with assessing the adequacy of the bulk power system. And NERC actually does that in a variety of ways, but one of the most high-profile ways is through its long-term reliability assessment. And that most recent assessment came out in December. And that assessment showed that many portions of our country are facing resource adequacy shortfalls in that 10-year time period, some of which are facing them sooner, like within 5 years.
Well, I think you saw what happened in Texas as a perfect example of that, as many people know that they went into the alternative energy sources and put a lot of pressure on their grid. And what did we see? We saw that it went down because the use could not sustain or be sustained by solar, wind, and all their alternative. It has to be all of the above.
Right. And, through that assessment, I think it showed, like within the PJM area, they had been at normal risk in prior years, but this was the first year that the PJM region actually moved to elevated risk. So again, through some of the transition to cleaner sources, you have generator retirements, whether due to economics or policy. It's hard to say sometimes, but they are retiring. We have our fossil fuel baseload generators retiring. We have new resources coming online that you need more of because they don't provide electricity around the clock like baseload does. They also don't provide those essential reliability services to our grid that our baseload generators provide, things like inertia and ramping, which, they help us through day-to-day fluctuations in demand and supply. They really help keep the grid stable. And so you do see these projections where there are challenges to keep the grid stable and reliable in the future.
And maybe explain for our audience, what is PJM and what does it stand for and why should we care?
PJM is the Regional Transmission Organization, so they are responsible for basically the transmission system across a 13-state region. Our region, ReliabilityFirst, kind of, aligns with theirs. Our responsibility is ReliabilityFirst. We are basically enforcing the NERC mandatory standards for reliability. So, and our entities that we enforce those standards with are power companies, their utilities, their generators, and they are RTOs like PJM, and then we have MISO to the west of us. So, that's kind of the landscape of this area.
So PJM's our electrical grid.
Yes.
In this region. And ReliabilityFirst, for the way I understand its role is basically you oversee PJM and make sure they're doing the things they do to make sure the lights actually come on when you flip that switch.
We're overseeing them to see that they're planning accordingly, that they're operating accordingly in terms of keeping things reliable and stable.
Sure.
Yes.
Great. Wonderful. So Jeff, let's turn back to the governor's proposal. You mentioned RGGI. Could you just explain to our audience what RGGI is and how that's different from some of the proposals that Governor Shapiro has outlined?
Well, at the basis, it's a carbon tax. So any carbon that is being produced above certain levels by a coal-fired power plant, an older gas-fired plant, is taxed at a rate. This money is then collected by the state, and it does nothing really to eliminate carbon in the atmosphere. An older coal plant's going to produce what it produces. It's not going to be retrofitted to try and offset that. And then, this money ostensibly then goes back, some portion of it to ratepayers, some portion to fund alternative energy sources, which again, we've yet to see an alternative energy source to this date that is capable of a commercial scale of replacing gas and nuclear. Now, there's a lot of hope for these small nuclear modular plants, but they're talking 10 years before they have a demonstration project ready to go. Well, by 10 years, we could be without electricity for 5 and 6 hours a day. And I think this is the thing that really needs to be understood by policymakers, lawmakers, regulators, and the public at large. It is at least, in my opinion, 50 to 60 years before you're at a point where you may have a technology that's capable on a commercial scale of replacing gas especially, and maybe not, but that's being very hopeful. We need to run our economy. We need to run our hospitals. We need to run our office buildings. We need to, be able to heat our homes and cool our homes and charge our electric cars that are in some states mandated. The people have to start to go to electric cars. And so we see this constant demand going up. And, I think Tim from ReliabilityFirst, he makes a very strong point, and I don't think it's, he's not trying to be dramatic about it. People can die when you don't have reliable electricity. We saw it in Texas a few years ago when they were without power for multiple days. And it wasn't because people froze to death, it's because they couldn't use their home medical equipment. And you're going to face the same thing multiple places. So I think there has to be this understanding that fossil fuels are not the enemy. They are what we need today to get us to a point that we want to go, but aren't capable of going to right now. And gas has reduced our carbon footprint. It's, really helped clean the environment. The newer gas plants are even more efficient than the current gas plants. So, is it ever going to be zero carbon? Well, no. Because it is what it is. But as you continue to reduce that, you are making inroads for the environment. But I think another fear with RGGI, Tim, is that, if RGGI had been instituted, and then you have the very plants that it's taxing shut down because economically it makes no sense for their owners to run them, well, you've taxed something that you no longer have a tax revenue from. So what are you going to tax to get that revenue? Manufacturing, newer gas plants, our cars. I know that sounds a little crazy, but that can extend further and further, once that becomes law. And really some of the more current proposals are pretty much more of the same. And I get the two confused, press and pacer, because there's different policies within them. But, the notion that you're going to charge a carbon tax, take 70% of that and give it back to the ratepayers, why are we two-stepping this around through the state? How about if we have reliable energy that's produced at a reasonable cost, and then nobody's rates go up and they don't need a rebate to pay their gas bill?
So that's where I was gonna come back to essentially say that exact thing, that what you outlined was essentially a government plan to make your prices go higher, because let's be honest, the generators will pass that on to consumers. So your energy bills go higher because there's now this carbon tax associated, to then go to Harrisburg, for Harrisburg to give a portion of that back to you to lower your energy bills. The cynic in me says, why don't we just let people keep their own money? Yes. So I completely agree with that perspective, Jeff, as you go through, and it's remarkable to me that another point that you made is around that same. We're doing that roundabout tax shuffling, but you also mentioned that it's still not actually driving carbon lower, which is the purported goal of this whole process. In my estimation, this is really just about a tax scheme that shuffles money to where the political powers and that be in the moment send it to their pet projects. And quite honestly, at the federal level right now, we're seeing a lot of this get exposed and eliminated as pure waste and abuse. And it's certainly something we should be preventing happening, especially around such a critical service, which is our electrical grid here in the Commonwealth. So let's shift a little bit to demand on the grid. There's been a lot of talk, and Valerie is probably one of the foremost leaders in the House Republican caucus for sure, around new technologies. And there's a lot of talk around the artificial intelligence movement and its demand on the energy grid and just data centers and what have you. So what is driving demand in our electrical grid beyond, obviously, AI, but beyond AI and even further? Diane?
Yeah, so, on top of the challenges that I already described, just with retirements and the resource mix changing, demand is very formidable right now. And you hit on it, it's data centers, it's crypto mining, hydrogen production, electrification policies, at a time when we're already kind of stretched with our supply and our resources. We are experiencing estimates of demand growth that could be 2 to 3 times as much as demand has grown in the past 2 decades. And there's a lot of estimates around it, but these data centers, make no mistake about it, they use a lot of energy. Behind, 1 meter for one data center, you essentially could have the amount of power that is consumed in the city of San Francisco. And so that's a very concentrated load. And there are issues with us, first and foremost, serving that, having enough supply to serve it. So from the planning aspect, there are concerns that we're trying to work through.
Yes. And we've seen Microsoft purchase 3 Mile Island or through Constellation Energy to fuel their own data center there, which just demonstrates the amount of energy that a single one of these units is going to take. And imagine all of the other folks that are putting together data centers all across the nation. But even here in Pennsylvania, it's going to be dramatic. The other challenge I think we have too is that we're encouraging kids and schools to use more energy and iPads, and as part of that AI learning, they're all into robotics, things like that. That all uses more energy, but I think it's been disingenuous because at the same time, the schools have been pushing all of these alternative energies and putting a negative spin on LNG. When I mentioned earlier that just the Wall Street Journal did an article that there was the DOE under the Biden administration buried a study that basically said that the impact of LNG, that LNG would reduce, not reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, but it wouldn't be as great as what the previous administration had stated. So, and in fact, it would actually displace coal. And at the end, using gas is actually saving us a lot more, but we have other energy demands that we're going to have to address.
Yeah, there is no shortage of, people or industries that want to use more and more electricity now and into the future. And as we've said, that's why the all of the above approach, we're really going to need everything to meet that demand. But I think we also need to understand how each type of resource operates, its benefits, its limitations. The resource mix is more than just a jigsaw puzzle. I think it's more like a Rubik's Cube where, you can impact the entire system by changing one thing. And we're seeing some of that happen. And so we need to get ahead of this. And
we haven't even gotten into the quantum computing stuff that is really going to use energy, because the cooling that is required is unbelievable. And in fact, we're seeing I think off the coast of the Arctic, the Microsoft is, Google, is putting their servers in under the water. Now tell me, how is that not going to contribute to ice melt and things like that? So that's something that, I think people just in our schools just don't quite understand, that the demand that is going to be on here, but yet at the same time demonizing some of our greatest fuel sources that we have right under our feet.
And when you think of the data centers, I don't think people really understand what a data center is. What is data? Well, data is everything in your life every day, from your medical records to your credit card transactions to your banking to birth certificates, death certificates, job history. I mean, everything.
Someone told me that every time you do a ChatGPT search, you kill 3 trees. So think about that.
Yeah, so we talked about the demand on the system. Let's wrap it up here shortly with talking a little bit about supply. So obviously, if we're getting to the point where we're at risk in the relatively near future of blackouts or brownouts, then there's a supply issue if demand's going up. Both of you work around the industry, with industry partners. What are you seeing as far as investments in the space to meet that rising demand across the Commonwealth? And we both come from the Southwest, as do the two of you. So I would love to compare that to maybe what West Virginia or Ohio is doing as well.
Well, I would tell you West Virginia and Ohio are investing significantly more. There continues to be a pall over investment in Pennsylvania because of the uncertainty of RGGI, Presser, Pace. Are we going to be taxed? If we can build the same plant in East Liverpool, Ohio, and get better incentives and not have to worry about them joining RGGI, because Ohio is not going to join RGGI, that plant can power facilities in Pennsylvania, but they get all the economic benefit of it. And, just as an aside, it will create carbon. The carbon isn't going to sit in Ohio. It moves east, with the wind patterns. So the carbon is still going to end up coming through Pennsylvania. So this notion that we don't want to build these plants because we're going to increase carbon in Pennsylvania, you're going to increase carbon in Pennsylvania if the plants are built in Michigan, Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky. It's all coming this way. I think that's the biggest thing, is just this uncertainty on the part of investors, of the power companies that would build these plants. And even with, we're talking earlier about these, data centers and so forth. Even if they build their own plant or recommission an existing plant, and it's behind the meter, as it's called, not really affecting the grid, it still needs to be permitted. It still needs to be regulated. It still needs all these things that any other plant does. And quite frankly, Pennsylvania doesn't have a great track record of getting these permits done and getting them through. The last gas-fired power plant built in Pennsylvania was in 2019 when it opened. There are somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 under construction in Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky right now. So that pretty much shows you what you need to know from that investment standpoint, and why they won't really open those those checkbooks right now and invest here.
Well, thank you so much. Governor Shapiro is known to say that he's tired of losing to Ohio. So I hope he's listening to this message, because right now we are, especially in this space. And I want to thank both of you for joining Valerie and I for such an important discussion around our energy grid and reliability. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.